Good morning, all. This is Anushri from People Matters, and we are back with an exciting session of our webcast in partnership with Center for Creative Leadership on the topic How to Leverage New Digital Leader Assessment Tools. As organizations become flatter and more globally distributed, over the next 10 years, renowned futurist Bob Johansen predicts that leaders must learn how to be there when they are not there. This means that HR executives need to ask themselves, how are our leaders showing up across digital workspaces? How can our leaders develop their virtual personas for more workforce impact? In this webinar with CCL, you will learn how organizations are using digital assessments to accelerate leadership development. So, in this webcast, we'll broadly cover these following 3 points. Why should you invest in digital leadership assessment tools? How can your organization utilize these new assessment tools to help leaders understand and develop their virtual persona? How should HR leaders integrate these new tools within standard talent management processes? I take the pleasure to invite and introduce the speakers for today's webcast. Chris Downing, Vice President, Commercialization and Innovation, Center for Creative Leadership. Chris has 20 years of experience in managing functions including corporate strategy, business planning, partnerships, and marketing. Holly Downs, Senior Lead Research and Evaluation Faculty, Center for Creative Leadership. Holly supports CCL and the field through the development of new knowledge, methods, and approaches to the evaluation of leadership development. And we also have Steve Young, Senior Research Scientist, Center for Creative Leadership. So Steve provides services that help accelerate return on investment development, leadership development investment. He also the principal investigator for a CCL research initiative. Our partner for today's webcast is Center for Creative Leadership. CCL is a top-ranked global provider of leadership development. By leveraging the power of leadership to drive results that matter most to clients, CCL transforms individual leaders, teams, organizations, and society. CCL area of cutting-edge solution is steeped in extensive research and experience gained from working with hundreds and thousands of leaders in all levels. CCL is also ranked among the world's top 5 providers of executive education by Financial Times and in the top 10 by Bloomberg Business Week. For our audience, we have saved time for you to ask questions at the end of the webcast. For those who are live, can simply submit post questions at any time during session. We'll try to respond to as many questions as time allows. So we have an exciting topic to discuss in this webcast today. So without any further delay, let me invite Chris, Holly, and Steve to take over. Over to you.
Thank you so much, and we're so happy to be here. We've made today's session very interactive with a number of polls throughout. So please keep the questions coming in the chat window, and we look forward to answering everything as we go. So in the past few years, virtually every aspect of data has shifted, from what is considered data to how we get data to who owns data and what can be done with it. Whereas once data was a topic reserved for researchers and computer programmers, today is discussed by just about everyone. This revolution has been sparked by digital age technologies and fueled by the potential of big data to increase productivity and profit. According to a recent McKinsey report, data monetization is becoming a differentiator across all industries, with companies adding new data services, developing new business models, and even directly selling database products or utilities. At the same time, these advances also are bringing potential dangers, with data being used in ways that are unexpected, invasive, or discriminatory. These concerns have led to an increased demand for data transparency, which in turn has triggered new privacy laws and new ethical challenges for organizations, consumers, and employees. So how soon is HR will be having algorithms monitoring your phones, computers, and hallways, making decisions about you, aimed at increasing your own personal engagement and effectiveness as a leader, even when you're not present? To some degree, it's already happened and will continue to happen. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? At this point, I want to jump in and have you complete a response to the poll question that's asked on the screen currently. So, do you believe algorithms are a threat or opportunity for leadership development? You should see a link in your chat window. If you click on that link, you'll be able to answer this question. So please do so now. You can also copy and paste the link pollev.com/lead poll as well in your browser to complete the poll. Keep in mind also, as you're completing the poll, this will be the first of 4 poll questions. And so you may want to keep that browser open because it will be the same link that you go to fill out uh, every subsequent poll question.
It's so interesting to watch the results as they come in.
Yeah, it looked for a while. It was an "it depends" and then went back down to a threat. As we're seeing the results come in, it really is it's a difficult question to ask and answer, and so we hope to um, help you better understand the issues as we've thought of them at the Center for Creative Leadership. And so as we continue on, it will be interesting to see if your mindset changes in terms of how you might answer this question. I'm going to move on, but it seems that most people are thinking it's an opportunity or it depends.
No one's unsure.
Right. It does seem like an issue that you're either one or a threat, opportunity, or it depends. So certainly many certain people here on the call today. So before we go into the future of leader assessment, let me provide a quick history on leader feedback. That should help you see more clearly where we're headed in 2019 and beyond. The Center for Creative Leadership has encountered millions of leaders in our 45+ year history. We've studied, coached, and trained and counseled them across 6 continents in 150 countries. And in the course of this work, we continue to learn about the ways in which leaders give and receive feedback. So it's probably obvious I'm starting out with the 1970s, and could be the outfits and the hairstyle could have given it away. But this picture is from CCL's Greensboro, North Carolina headquarters in the US, circa 1972. And what you see here are 3 researchers studying leaders in action from behind a one-way mirror, complete with really fancy recording equipment for the time. And true to the industrial psychologist orientation, there are a couple of key words here. It's study and it's one way. This industrial psychologist approach was classic back in those days, and one of the main tools included the use of assessment centers. Centers that companies use to make selection decisions for senior manager and executive positions. Based on how they performed in a series of tests, leaders were rated and then slotted into positions or not. It was inevitable, though, that these research guinea pigs would invariably say, well, how did I do? What could I have done better? Did I win? Was I better? Was I the same or worse than others? In essence, what they wanted was feedback on their performance. And so while starting out as a research think tank devoted to studying leaders, CCL began offering programs to people who said they wanted to know how to improve. And that starts with getting feedback. Well, the rest, as they say, is history. CCL began collecting all kinds of information and data from leaders, including comments and reactions from bosses, peers, and direct reports back in the leader's workplace. And in addition to using this valuable information for correlations and research studies, participants began to get this same information fed back to them as a way to increase understanding, self-awareness, and ultimately to make improvements as leaders. In those early days, tons of paper and pencil assessments were received each day into our offices. CCL employed 3 people whose only job it was to open envelopes and stack the papers into piles so that someone else could come in and code the results. When CCL added 90,000 square feet of space, 10,000 square feet was solely devoted to assessment, collection, and handling. Now, with the internet and online scoring, the operations all fit into one room. Then by the late 90s and into the 2000s, the manual paper-based approach was overtaken by computers and the online data collection, but still referred affectionately as letters from home. These assessments grew exponentially, and we've certainly come a very long way. Since 2012, CCL has processed almost 150,000 self-assessments and questionnaires of leadership behavior, and almost the same number in terms of personality and psychological assessments. We've also looked at 126,000 leader 360-degree feedback with 1.26 million people providing feedback, these being peers, direct reports, bosses. And since 1997 altogether, we've provided 1.2 million leaders with feedback, with 12 million people providing these individuals with feedback. Now, if CCL has all this data, you're probably wondering, why are we evolving our approach to leader assessment? We've already got tons of data, right? Well, a few reasons. First is we live in a ratings economy where people can rate everything from Uber drivers to the US Post Office with a smartphone. So my question as a researcher is, where's all this data going? And how can we leverage it to make leaders more effective? Second, advances in cloud computing are now allowing us to collect data on leaders that were previously impossible. Leaders had been generating the data as a result of face-to-face and virtual interactions. We just didn't have cloud computing and analytics capable of doing something useful with it. Now we do. These social and technological changes are also happening in the context of leadership development's what we call stickiness problem, which is about improving the odds that leaders take what they've learned and make it stick. New digital, data-driven digital technologies have the potential to increase the stickiness of the learning on the job, only if we can capture the data that leaders generate, crunch it, and return useful feedback to the leader about their progress. And we've known for a very long time that providing real-time and high-quality feedback to leaders will accelerate their development on the job. So which of the many digital assessment tools will help leaders increase self-awareness and achieve their goals? We're conducting several research studies at CCL to find out. Here's a quick review of 3 of them, and then Holly and Chris will go into a deeper dive on the results of what we're learning from a couple of these tools in a bit. First, on your far left, you'll see that we're looking at testing and have tested with a number of clients a survey pulse tool, a leader pulse tool, that enables leaders to seek out quick targeted feedback on their own about a goal that is important to them. So we're trying to better understand, our leaders who have access to on the job continuous real-time feedback on their phone well after a leadership program, do they experience better leader development outcomes versus those leaders who don't have access to the same tool? Second, Watson is able to assess your personality using social media activity with the precision of a self-report assessment. Now, the question for us is, can we also assess your leadership competencies using the same social media data? So right now, we're in the process of collecting thousands of data points to answer this question. So when you have time, we encourage you to check out digitalleader.ccl.org and share with your network. And then finally, we're seeing if leaders who practice presentations in front of a virtual audience of avatars and then get instant machine-based feedback, do they also experience better leader development outcomes than only those who have access to a human coach and to practice formal speeches and presentations. Why are we interested in these new assessments? A few reasons. One is they're cheaper. With machines, they're doing more than number crunching work for us. Second is we can help leaders better identify and manage their critical blind spots by providing them with subjective data from the traditional 360s, as well as objective data via these new digital tools. Third, with the ability to assess the whole leader, we can better personalize development efforts to the areas that really matter to the leader and the organization. Fourth, with machines crunching the data, leaders will spend less time interpreting the data. And that's important because it's going to get leaders to planning for development and action more quickly. And then finally, these digital tools also give leaders more real-time feedback to enhance their ability to lead. So you're probably thinking, do leaders really need these tools to accelerate their development in the digital age? Bob Johansen is the CCL collaborator who works at the Institute for the Future in Silicon Valley, California. Bob's group is about 60 to 80% accurate with regards to its forecast about what technological trends will impact people over the course of the next 10 years. In his 2016 book called The New Leadership Literacies, Thriving in a Future of Extreme Disruption and Distributed Everything, one of his predictions is that leaders will need to know how to be there even when they're not there. So what does this mean exactly? Although many leaders may currently lead best in person, shape-shifting organizations of the future will require you to be many places at once. So leaders will have to engage with people who are geographically, organizationally, and temporally distributed. In-person meetings will still be best for some things, according to Bob, but you're going to have to decide which medium is good for what, with which people, and at what time. New assessment tools such as the Leader Pulse tool I shared, the social media assessment, email sentiment, and audio-video analysis can give leaders feedback about how they show up across different times and physical spaces. And that's why we at CCL, we've designed, developed, and tested a number of new leader development experiences for two reasons. One is to help leaders better understand their virtual persona and how they're showing up in the digital world and not just their face-to-face persona. And two, provide guidance for how to create and sustain that virtual persona that they want to have. So at this point, I want to turn it over to Chris, and she's going to discuss how we did this recently with a virtual coaching tool.
Thank you, Steve. Before I talk about the unique digital coaching tool that we have been experimenting with, I wanted to tie this conversation into some foundational leader competencies. As Steve mentioned, CCL continues to explore innovative ways to help leaders become better leaders. And that includes how leaders show up virtually as well as face-to-face. And one way that we can look at effective leaders is by concentrating on some of those foundational competencies that leaders need to focus on, regardless of what level a leader is at in an organization, regardless of their function or what region they come from. And those fundamental four competencies are self-awareness, communication, influence, and learning agility. So when I talk about this new assessment tool that we have experimented with, I wanted to point out the leader competencies that this tool helps address, and that's self-awareness, communication, and to a lesser degree, influence. So we've experimented with this great tool. It's an assessment tool called Pitch Vantage. And at the end of this webinar, we'll put a link in the chat session in case you're interested in using this tool. The clients that we have tested this with find it very useful, very relevant. But Pitch Vantage basically lets you instantly deliver engaging virtual training where leaders can improve their communication skills and they get immediate personalized feedback. So the way it works is that the participant or the leader would deliver a speech or a presentation for about 2 minutes. in front of avatars. So on this slide that I'm showing right now, you'll see the participant in the top right corner, the avatars who are sitting at, in this case, a conference room table, and there are a couple of different scenarios that you can choose. And you'll see in the top left corner a timer. And once you start your presentation, your practice presentation, you'll notice the avatars. If you're doing a good job, the avatars start to nod their heads and they are very attentive. And if you're doing not so good a job, the avatars are going to start to get distracted. They may start talking amongst themselves or looking at their watch or perhaps even getting up and leaving the room. So the person who's practicing their communication or their presentation is getting immediate feedback by looking at how the avatars are responding to them. So once you're done with your 2-minute presentation, you immediately get instant feedback on 10 different elements of your presentation. And it also gives you personalized tips on how you can improve. So I won't read through all 10 of these, but just know that you immediately get feedback on your pitch and your pace and how many pauses you had during your 2-minute presentation. And also eye contact. So this tool is very effective for leaders seeking to improve their influence, their communication, and of course, self-awareness or self-understanding about the impact that they're having on others around them relative to communication. So leaders can continue to practice their presentations and they can receive instant machine-based feedback, which is highly effective. So you may wonder how the leaders' scores are tabulated. The scores are based on speech research that studied the best and worst presenters. Over 10,000 speeches of the best and worst speeches were rated by speech experts. Then machine learning classifiers were developed with factors differentiating those good speeches from the ones that were not as good. So what I want to do is tell you about how we used Pitch Vantage as a virtual coaching tool with a client. So this is our client story. And back in a few months ago, we worked with this client, who's a large association of female executives. In this case, we had 100 leaders. 100 of these executives were in attendance for an in-person leadership event. And one of the things that they wanted to explore was their leadership brand, a personal brand. So we were in a large ballroom, meeting room, and we broke up these 100 people into teams of between 5 to 7 people. We had about 20 teams. Each group or each team had one computer with Pitch Vantage loaded up on the laptop. And ahead of time, we asked them to come to the session prepared with a 2-minute speech or a statement that they would be delivering for their table group. They watched a demonstration of how Pitch Vantage worked. And then the first participant in each group put on some headphones so that they could concentrate on their speech. And then they gave their speech. The rest of the table group used some scoring worksheets, just pencil and paper scoring worksheets to score that participant's presentation. Once the speaker was done, they pressed a button, they received their machine-generated results. Then all of the people at the table shared their feedback from scoring the participant. So the participant got a machine score and also a human score around how they did with their presentation. So what did we learn from this? A couple of interesting things. One, the machine scoring and the human scoring gave really different types of feedback. All of it useful, or most of it was useful. The machine report was thorough and it was quantitative, just like a couple slides ago when I showed you a copy of the immediate feedback report that's given. The human feedback tended to be less specific. So they were sharing feedback like, oh, you did a really good job. The machine feedback was very pointed and specific. Number two, another lesson that we learned. It's really important to demonstrate the technology to the entire group before the exercise begins. It helped do several things. One, the participants could see how the avatars moved. They could understand the way that they would get the immediate feedback. And it also helped to reduce some anxiety about even doing the exercise. Number three, it's a really high energy activity that works well in the afternoon of an all-day training session. And we all, as trainers or people in this field, are looking for ways that we can keep the energy up for a group when we're working with them all day. And this was just a fantastic activity to put in there. So we learned that. Number four, an interesting lesson that we learned, the machine might be a little more honest than the humans. And so it was interesting that some of our table coaches or table facilitators said that the participants weren't really candid with their feedback to the person presenting. And it was only after they saw the machine-generated results that they would say something like, oh, well, I guess I did see that you paused a lot. So I guess I would agree that you rushed through it too fast. And so it was interesting that it took the machine readout report before other humans would actually say, yeah, that may be right. So humans were not as forthcoming with good quality feedback than the machine. And I think one of the other lessons that we learned is that preparation is important. So in our use of this with 100 leaders in a big ballroom setting, in a training setting, it was very important for them to have come prepared with a speech. And so we did that in our pre-work and pre-reading material and asked them to come prepared, and they did. And that was really good. Is there anything else, Steve or Holly, that you would say was a good lesson learned?
No, I think you covered it all pretty well, Chris. It is a new piece of technology, and so leadership development trainers who are going to look to integrate this in a classroom, I think it's very important that they really understand the technology and are able to answer all the questions about what it does and how it works, because participants will certainly, anytime they're in a classroom setting and they're going to be getting feedback, there could be some anxiety, right? And if the machine is giving you not so good feedback, how do you take that? So you want to be able to be very clear on the tool and how it was validated and normed on a population that represents, the leaders who are taking the program.
Yeah, great point. I see we already have some people participating in our second poll. So this is really just your use of a virtual coaching tool like the one we just talked about. One, are you using it currently? Is this something you're interested in using perhaps within a year or maybe 1 to 3 years out, or not interested at all? So it's, again, as Holly said earlier, it's fascinating to see how these bar charts kind of change as you all are inputting your responses. So keep responding here. Let's see what you say about your use of a tool like this in your organization.
Chris, the only thing that I wanted to add was that it was so fascinating to watch the feedback from those that were in the session, the humans, that they at times waited on the feedback from the tool before they became a little more critical or honest within that activity. So it was really interesting to watch the human reaction to that.
Great observation. And this looks like it's pretty evenly distributed here. If we kind of turn it on its side, looks like a little bell curve, right? So a lot of people, almost half, interested in using this product. I guess together, what, 75% or so, 77% interested in using it in within 1 to 3 years. So fascinating. Great, thank you. Thank you very much for registering your vote.
And again, on this poll and then the next two, the link is in your chat, or it's the same browser you have open from the first poll, pollev.com/lead poll. So feel free to continuously participate. Appreciate it.
Excellent. So, thank you. Now I'm going to turn it over to Holly, who is going to talk to you about another exciting digital tool.
Hello, I am very excited to be here today to talk about our second case study with the Leader Pulse tool. So Steve talked a little bit about it. It's a tool to facilitate feedback over a duration of a leader development journey. It's quick, it's targeted feedback, and it's real time on a goal that they choose. But we had a situation where sometimes people are excited to use these tools, but this opportunity, this second case study, actually presented us with a perfect opportunity because we had an international chemicals and sustainable energies company, and they did not want to do full 360s with their top 75 leaders. But they really wanted them to receive real-time feedback and aggregate the data eventually for some ROI and ROE estimates. So we had an opportunity to be able to use this Leader Pulse tool with them so that we could allow them to get this feedback and also allow them to get it over time. Within this actual case study, it's a 9-month journey, and they wanted to have individual goals that they wanted to set, and then they wanted to get feedback from different stakeholders. So from their inline boss, from also peers and mentors too. So they really wanted to be able to get this feedback, but they didn't want to do the full 360. And so we had a perfect opportunity to test this tool. So, and you can switch to the next slide. So remember this, leadership is like a muscle. The more intelligently you train, the stronger you get. So for most leaders, the great challenge is not necessarily understanding the practice of leadership. It's practicing their understanding of leadership. So Leader Pulse actually enables the leaders to work out their muscles by providing regular, personalized feedback on specific leadership goals and tracks their progress through their leadership journey. So in other words, they get to set their goal, they also get to set their raters, and they get that personalized feedback that they can have for themselves so they can see how they're doing at the beginning of their journey, toward the middle of their journey, and at the end of their journey. We found that doing it at least 3 times was really important. And this was a perfect opportunity since they wanted us to actually do an evaluation for them. It was a perfect opportunity to fill in and use the Kirkpatrick level. It wasn't just the smile sheets or being able to see the end of session satisfaction, but we really wanted to be able to look at their behavior and to be able to help them look at this information so they could actually collect this information and to use it as they were going through their journey. So CCL's evaluation experts partner with organizations to assess these different levels. And this was a perfect opportunity to dig more into those higher levels in level 3 and level 4 so that we could look across the journey and to look at the class as a whole, not just individuals, but also to be able to look at things like what are their common goals? What types of feedback are they getting? The other important piece about this is that this company in particular really wanted to be able to open up lines of communication for that feedback. They weren't necessarily good at getting that feedback before, and they wanted to be able to utilize a tool without having to do the full 360s just at the beginning and at the end. They really wanted to be able to track this over time and to have these quick ways to pulse different stakeholders so that they could collect that information. So on this slide, you'll actually see examples of what it looks like on your mobile phone. You are either able to do this on your laptop, but the other piece of this is that you could also use mobile devices or typically any other device that you would use. So it's easy for the leader to set up. They schedule the feedback pulses throughout, as I said before, the duration of their leadership development journey. And raters experience a simple mobile friendly rating system. So they are able to actually look over time to get both quantitative feedback, so some quick feedback on some sort of question about how they are doing, but then they are also able to get more extended response answers from different stakeholders as well. So it's a simple, as you can see here, this is a simple dashboard that they have access to this. They're able to see just at a really quick glance, the feedback that they have received, as I said before, at least 3 times throughout the duration of their journey. In addition, we have dashboard reporting that they can also look at from an administrator point of view. So if you wanted to be able to look at an aggregate of this data over time, the power of these tools is not only being able to the individual to see their information themselves, but also we as the deliverers can help look over time and look at the aggregate of everyone in terms of the goals that they are setting, the progress that they are making. And it's just a really exciting way to collect more information so that they can dig deeper into what that experience was like and how that it contributed to their goals over time. So we learned a lot of things through the different pilots that we've done with this piece and with the different clients that we've worked with. And these sources, this is actually talked about in an upcoming chapter that is coming out by Steve Young, one of the presenters today. But one of the 5 core things that we wanted to talk about was one, involve the boss, coach, or the mentor really early on in the process. The key here is that, as we said before, the individual, him or herself, actually sets up their goal. And what we've discovered through this process is sometimes writing a goal is hard. It's harder than it appears. And so involving a boss, a coach, or a mentor really early on in the process help to finalize those goals and to also fine tune those goals so that it was something that was really meaningful to the individual as well as to their organization. The second thing was to give leaders time to reflect on and discuss their goal development. This comes not only at the beginning of it, but also throughout the journey when they are collecting this information. The third piece, tip or some of the lessons that we learned was to educate leaders on the types of development goals and how the choice of goal impacts the effective use of that tool. So it was really important to really look at the different types of goals, whether it was a behavioral goal or a competency goal, and to really understand how that you are forming those goals so that it was something meaningful for you, that you collected that information over time. Fourth thing was to focus the leaders on selecting at least one key development goal and to receive ongoing user-driven feedback over a 6 to 12 month time period. And finally, the last tip that I'll give you here today is goal-based feedback should follow a regular cadence with consistent set of raters that allows leaders to seek micro feedback as needed. So what I mean by that is that it was important to not only give them the opportunity to collect that regular feedback on an ongoing basis at least 3 times. But also what we found was that the tool also allowed you to get micro feedback as well. So if they were going into a meeting, say, and they wanted to collect information about how they were pausing or how they were presenting, they also then were able to send out additional micro feedback pulses so they could collect that information as well. And a bonus tip that I will give you is to provide simple on-the-job reminders to leaders of their options for dealing with feedback that they received. So what we discovered by this, it was really important not only to gather that feedback, but also to provide support about how to interpret that feedback, just as you would with a 360, but also to think about doing this on an ongoing basis of how that you support the leaders that you're working with in receiving that feedback and what they do with it. So we actually are going to do a third poll here with you today, and we wanted to collect information about if you are currently using Leader Pulse, if you're interested in using within a year, or interested in using within the next 1 to 3 years, or if you're not interested at all, just to see what our audience, what you are all doing within this realm with this type of tool. Anything that you would add, Chris or Steve?
No, I think, like you said, that last bonus tip, Holly, is really important because people can get feedback that, as we know, if it's negative, they react emotionally. And so, like you said, giving leaders tips and tools to deal with their emotional reactions so that they accept the feedback, they don't get defensive, and they really concentrate on the information in it and use it to get better.
It is such an important learning also for us as facilitators and for CCL overall to think about different ways rather than just waiting until the end of a journey to collect that information. This was empowering our leaders and our clients to be able to get this information over time is really important.
Yeah, and I think there is also there's lots of pulse survey tools out there. And a lot of these tools get deployed in organizations and they're not well integrated in terms of the entire leader development experience. And so that book chapter and the tips shared, some of those are all geared toward how do you integrate a leader pulse within your entire experience so that it feels like it's very much a part of what leaders need to go through to have a great experience. And if you treat it as a bolt on, it's very unlikely that people will ever use it.
Good. It looks like some of the answers are slowing down. It looks like interested in using within the next 1 to 3 years tended to be really high with our audience that we have here today. Thank you so much for participating in the poll.
Great. So I'm going to bring it sort of to summarize and provide you a big picture perspective. For decades, CCLs assessed leaders using self-assessments, 360 surveys, and evaluations by trained observers, among many other methods. These tools have been immensely helpful in giving leaders critical insights about themselves and the impact they have on others and the organization as a whole. These are really what we call the human inputs that result in our understanding of leaders' inner selves, such as emotions, mindsets, their outer self, so observable words, actions, interactions, and also others' perceptions of the leader. Technologies that leaders use to enrich their personal lives, such as intelligent personal assistants, social networking sites or apps, and biometric modeling, they're now helping leaders get a deeper look at who they are, including how they show up in the digital workplace. So as we've discussed, within seconds, you can get a personality measure of yourself based on your social media activity. Your wearable devices can monitor health factors around the clock. These are really the digital input. But it would be a mistake to really assume that these new offerings are going to replace traditional approaches that rely on humans rating themselves and others. Rather, these digital tools should help the leader more quickly focus on development areas that really matter. These digital tools also benefit leaders because they provide more real-time feedback on demand, reinforcing what new approaches are working and suggesting when it may be worth tweaking or changing something up. So really what CCL is saying is we believe the human input combined with digital data, that's going together help leaders most achieve their development goals. And it's really important to remember that all leader assessments, they have to predict collective business outcomes that organizations ultimately care about most, like retention, revenue, costs. For organizations, leader assessment data really for the organization only becomes an asset when it's used to inform decisions or actions. And the best way to leverage that leader assessment data is to tie it to a tangible business outcome so that you can prioritize leadership development investments and manage your change initiatives better. Recently, we launched CCL Fusion, which leverages your leadership investments and data assets by tying them to a business ROI, like costs or revenue. That predictive model we provide identifies first the leader actions that matter most to your business, the predicted impact of improving those actions, and then finally, we provide action planning tools and playbooks that enable leaders to achieve improvements on those prioritized actions. Some of you might be thinking that we're advocating for HR to take on more toys and gadgets and bombarding leaders with more data points. These stats here come from Josh Bersin and they're really worrisome. But Bersin he's also said that technology vendors just want to make the software and sell it. They don't worry about how employees will actually use it to improve performance and productivity. Leadership development practitioners, we feel, have that background in people and with a code of ethics and are a great position to take this technology and implement it effectively, where the potential benefits of the new technology are realized while reducing negative impacts on people. So what I'm really saying is we've got to use new technology as appropriate. We need to make the technology augment or enhance the leader's capabilities and capacities for leading. If we think carefully about what we're trying to do in leadership development with assessment, then we can thoughtfully consider whether or not one of these new tools is going to give new insights to leaders about themselves above and beyond what we're currently doing. But if we ignore these new innovations in technology, we're likely going to deprive our leaders from getting the insights they need to show up at work and lead their teams more effectively in the digital age. So the bottom line is we're not advocating that you take on more toys and gadgets. We're really suggesting that you start small by trying out one new promising assessment tool in a small pilot within your organization to see how it lands. And then take those lessons learned and revise your approach, or just pick and pilot a different assessment tool. Erica Jong is a noted novelist, and she once said that the trouble is, if you don't risk anything, you risk even more. So are robots going to be taking over for us in leadership development? That's extremely unlikely, but I'll tell you what is likely. Machine automation will increase the speed with which we find meaningful patterns in our data that we can act on, allowing leaders to focus on the actual development work, which only we can do as humans. This includes trying out new leadership skills, connecting with peers and mentors about new approaches, and reflecting on what's working and what's not. Machines can also give us more opportunities to practice new leader micro skills, such as effective communication, which allows our human coaches to add more value by helping us make sense of what we're learning in our context, providing empathy, and helping us develop higher level skills like strategic perspective. To partner with machines and potentially touch many more leaders in our organizations with these machine-based feedback tools, L&D professionals and leaders can and should learn how to be responsible consumers of new AI-driven technologies by asking the right questions and being critical thinkers about what vendors are telling you about their solutions, how they're training these AI assessments to assess leader capabilities. And if you're not asking these hard questions, you could be left behind, or worse, expose your company to a faulty, biased snake oil product. We know it can be very overwhelming to try something new. And to help you, we're giving you a checklist that we also use to decide if it makes sense to use a new digital assessment with our clients. On the screen are 4 fundamental questions you should ask yourself before using any digital assessment tool in your organization. I want to let you just take a moment to read these and think about one of the tools we've discussed today. Can you say yes to all of these questions? If so, I encourage you to access our white paper, which is at the link shown here below, so you can move through the rest of our checklist. Other criteria include whether the assessment is culturally sensitive, it's valid and free from bias. This white paper also includes details on what we've discussed in today's webinar in more detail. So as a final poll question, and then we'll turn it over to the Q&A, we did want to return to this question that we asked at the beginning. And so if you could, again, fill out this poll question, we'd be very interested, and I'm sure many of you will, to see each other's answers. So are algorithms a threat, or are they an opportunity for leadership development? In consideration of everything we've discussed today, we're interested to see where you might be, may have changed, or maybe it's more of a threat now. We certainly hope not, and we hope we portrayed an optimistic view for the future. Well, it's looking like Chris and Holly, I think we have positive impact so far from these numbers, 100% opportunity.
I believe we have our results here, 100% as opportunity. So Steve, Molly, and Chris, thank you for your great insights. And let's move to the questions from our audience now. So the first that we have received from our audience is, what are the capabilities that are central to building leaders for digital age?
So what I would say to this is, it's a very good question, and one where CCL Fusion.
Steve, I'd like to interrupt you for a moment. You can stop sharing your screen now. Oh. Great.
Yeah, great. I was just saying that the CCL Fusion solution that we talked about, that would really be our answer, or any other approach that is similar to that. Because what it does is, for every organization, we work with our clients now to figure out what are your business outcomes that matter most to you. And so for a lot of organizations, their financials, such as revenue or cost, their turnover, their innovation and pipeline product progression. And so those are the outcomes that organizations are being judged on, whether they either survive or they don't make it in the digital age. And so what we do with our clients is we figure out what are those key outcomes, and then we bring that external data in and combine it with their leader assessment data. And so what that involves is taking a 360 on a set of a number of leaders, where we can then look at what are the top predictors, what are the top leadership capabilities that are having the greatest impact on those business outcomes. And through that, for every client's culture is unique, their strengths, their weaknesses. And so we really try to do that with every client to give them that formula for what will be those capabilities that they need to survive in the digital age.
Sure, sure. Holly and Chris, would you like to add something to this question?
I
I don't have anything to
go
add.
ahead. I don't think that I do either. I will say that in terms of looking broadly overall, we have been able to see agility and some different pieces have been consistent within some of the places that we've worked, and being an open-minded person in terms of open to using these different tools and different pieces. But exactly what Steve said in terms of the way that we are using Fusion to be able to look with our clients on a one-on-one basis is really important to do.
Sure. Great, great. So the next question is more about investing in a digital tool and technology. So, leveraging or implementing a tool or a technology takes a lot of investment, right? And so how do you build that business case for ROI of these assessment tools when there are a lot of technology coming in, there are a lot of tools available in the market, and the shelf life of those tools and technology are decreasing?
That's a great question. One thing that I would say to begin with is we had a couple of slides that indicated things that you would look for building an ROI. So things like, is this does this tool allow you to get information faster? And is it personalized so that it actually is going to have an impact on the individual? And you can tie that into the ROI. Steve mentioned CCL Fusion, which is taking data and tying it and looking at business outcomes and making the case for where you would invest. So I think we would suggest that approach. I also would say things like start small. You always hear that saying, don't try to boil the ocean. And so I think from an ROI perspective or building the case for some of these tools, you start small with a particular population. It might be a high potential population. And as Holly was talking about in her example, with a set group of leaders, and there were very specific goals and objectives that they were striving for, and you can contain that, look at that population, and see how these tools are having an effect positively on behavior change as well as other targets that they're setting. And so for me, it's like, don't feel like you have to buy technology for everyone all at one time. Test and experiment and start small and don't boil the ocean. What would you add?
Yeah, I would say that's a really good explanation, Chris, especially what Holly suggested, where, after the first cohort of the top 25 executives of this energy company, they all had very positive feedback. It was level one Kirkpatrick right away about the tool. They liked the real-time nature of the tool. They liked getting it. It was short. It was quick. And that led to then our client saying, well, we want all these other leader levels and all these other development programs now to experience it. So it really started at the top where they were bought in positively. And so that's led to this tool being deployed across this organization.
Mhm. Great, great. So the next question that is about developing a virtual persona. So we mentioned in the webcast that how we can leverage digital assessment tools and develop virtual persona. So what is the significance of developing a virtual persona for leaders?
I can start and then maybe you guys chime in. For me, it's more and more leaders, all of us, are having to lead globally, and that includes leading virtually. But it's less about developing a virtual persona, and it's more about understanding. It's just important to understand how you show up in the virtual world. And so, to the extent that you can use tools to manage and lead and show up positively as a leader, knowing that you can't always be in a face-to-face or an in-person or physical kind of setting, that's important. So it's not about developing like a separate virtual persona. It's more about understanding the impact of you as a leader in these virtual environments.
Yeah, absolutely. That it's not about manipulating yourself or being another person. Often people are just not getting any feedback about how they're showing up in email, how they're communicating and leading in video, in all these different environments. And because we haven't had the tools yet to this point to give that feedback, right? Crunch it and give it back in a useful form. Most organizations are still just using tools that are best fit for giving feedback in a face-to-face environment. And again, that's not going away, but obviously leaders are now leading in all these other spaces. And so you've got to get feedback from those kind of platforms because they're in the best places to know how you're doing or not doing well.
Sure, sure. Great. So due to time crunch, yep. All right. So due to time crunch, we would have to end this webcast and this question and answer session. We have a few more questions which I would request our speakers to take offline. Once again, we thank our today's webcast partner, Center for Creative Leadership, and our speakers for valuable information that they have shared with us today. Meanwhile, to our audience, you can provide your feedback in the survey link provided in the chat section because your input matters. That concludes today's webcast. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.